Something just changed in America, and millions of gun owners are now trying to understand what it means for them. A new court ruling has triggered a wave of concern across the country. Legal experts are calling it one of the most important firearm-related decisions in recent memory. Advocacy groups are already reacting. Attorneys are preparing new challenges. And behind the scenes, federal agencies are reviewing what happens next. Because depending on how this ruling is interpreted, millions of gun owners could be affected. Not someday in the distant future. Right now. And the reason this story is spreading so quickly is because the ruling didn't come with a simple answer. It didn't clearly say everything changes today. It also didn't say nothing changes. Instead, it introduced something far more powerful. Uncertainty. Legal uncertainty. The kind that spreads through courtrooms, government agencies, and law enforcement departments almost immediately. And when uncertainty enters the legal system, people pay attention, especially when constitutional rights are involved. Now, at the center of this entire situation is one major question. How far can the government go when regulating firearms? That debate has existed for years. Some people believe stronger regulation is necessary for public safety. Others believe restrictions have already gone too far and violate constitutional protections. That conflict has fueled legal battles across the country, case after case, state after state, until eventually, one challenge rose high enough to reach a federal appeals court, and from there, the situation escalated quickly. The ruling that came out of that process is now creating shockwaves because of what it says about authority. Who has it, who doesn't, and what happens when agencies try to expand rules beyond what lawmakers originally wrote. That may sound technical at first, but here's why it matters. Many firearm regulations in the United States are not created directly by Congress. Instead, federal agencies often interpret existing laws and apply them to new situations. New firearm designs, new accessories, new technologies, new configurations. And over time, those interpretations can become extremely influential. In some cases, they effectively function like brand new rules. That's exactly what this court ruling focused on. The judges examined whether federal agencies had gone too far in interpreting the law, whether they had crossed the line from enforcing legislation into rewriting it. And according to the ruling, there are limits, strong limits. The court made it clear that major policy changes require clear authorization from Congress, not assumptions. Not broad interpretations, not vague language stretched beyond its original meaning. Clear authorization. Now think about what that means in practical terms. If a federal agency created a firearm-related rule based mainly on interpretation rather than direct congressional approval, that rule could now face serious legal challenges. And that's where the concern begins. Because over the years, many firearm regulations have depended on agency interpretation. Some involve classifications, others involve accessories, others involve technical definitions that most people never even think about. But now, attorneys across the country are looking at those regulations and asking one question: can they survive under this new ruling? Right now, nobody knows for sure. That uncertainty is exactly why millions of gun owners are paying attention. Because depending on how future courts apply this decision, some regulations could remain untouched, others could be weakened, and some could potentially disappear altogether. But here's the important part. This ruling did not instantly erase gun laws across America. That's not how the legal system works. Instead, it changed the framework courts use to evaluate those laws. And when the framework changes, future outcomes can change too. Already, legal experts are predicting a wave of new lawsuits, challenges to existing firearm regulations, challenges to enforcement actions, challenges to how agencies define certain weapons or accessories. Some of those cases could move quickly, others may take years. But either way, the legal landscape has shifted. And shifts like this rarely stay small. Now, another reason this ruling matters so much is because of the broader legal principle behind it. This decision is not only about firearms, it's about the power of federal agencies overall. Environmental regulations, health policies, financial rules, immigration enforcement. Any area where agencies interpret laws could feel the effects of this ruling, because the message from the court was bigger than one specific issue. The message was this: agencies cannot create major policy changes without clear authority from elected lawmakers. That principle could reshape how the federal government operates moving forward. And that's why legal analysts are describing this as more than just a gun case. They see it as a structural decision, one that affects the balance of power itself. Now, outside the courtroom, reactions have been intense. Gun rights groups are calling the ruling a major victory. They argue that it protects constitutional rights and prevents agencies from bypassing Congress. Some are even describing it as a turning point in the fight over firearm regulation. On the other side, gun control advocates are expressing concern. They warn that limiting agency authority could make it harder to respond to evolving firearm technology. They argue that Congress often moves too slowly to address emerging issues, and without flexible agencies, they fear dangerous gaps could appear in enforcement. Both sides agree on one thing, though. This ruling is significant. Very significant. Because regardless of political opinion, the legal impact is real. Federal agencies are now reviewing their own policies carefully. Lawyers are studying every word of the decision. Lower courts are preparing for new arguments, and lawmakers are under pressure to respond. That pressure could become especially intense if courts begin striking down existing regulations using this new framework. Because if enough challenges succeed, Congress may eventually be forced to step in directly, to rewrite laws, clarify definitions, or create entirely new legislation. But that process would not happen quickly. Congress is deeply divided on firearm issues, debates are heated, compromise is difficult, and major legislation often takes months, sometimes years, which means the courts may continue shaping this issue for a long time. That possibility is exactly why people are calling this a legal shockwave. Not because everything changed overnight, but because the ruling may slowly influence hundreds of future decisions. And over time, those decisions could dramatically reshape firearm regulation in America. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions right now is that this ruling only affects one type of gun or one specific rule. That's not true. The potential reach is much broader, because the court focused on how laws are interpreted, not just one individual regulation. That means the reasoning behind this decision could appear in many future cases. Cases involving classifications, cases involving licensing, cases involving enforcement authority, and cases involving constitutional protections. Every attorney working in firearm law is now studying this ruling closely, because they know it could become a powerful legal weapon in future litigation. Another important detail is how lower courts may respond differently. Some judges may apply the ruling aggressively. Others may interpret it narrowly. That could create different legal outcomes in different regions of the country. In one state, a regulation might survive. In another, a similar regulation might fail. And when that happens, confusion grows. Eventually, conflicts between lower courts often force the Supreme Court to step in again. That's another reason experts believe this story is far from over. This may not be the final battle. It may only be the beginning. Now, for everyday gun owners, the biggest question remains simple. What should I do? And the honest answer is this: stay informed. Because while most laws remain in effect right now, the legal environment is changing, and changes in the legal environment can eventually affect enforcement, regulations, and rights. That doesn't mean panic, it means awareness. Understanding what's happening, understanding how the courts are evolving, and understanding that major legal shifts often happen gradually, not through one dramatic moment, but through a chain of decisions over time. This ruling may be one of those moments, a starting point, a signal that the legal system is entering a new phase when it comes to firearm regulation. And if that's true, the effects could spread much further than many people realize today. As more lawsuits emerge, as more judges weigh in, and as agencies adjust to the new legal reality, the full impact will become clearer. But for now, one thing is certain. Millions of gun owners are watching closely, because when the courts begin redefining the limits of government authority, everyone understands that something important is happening, and this story is only just beginning. As this ruling continues to spread through the legal system, one thing is becoming impossible to ignore. The real battle may only now be starting, because major court decisions rarely end arguments. Most of the time, they create new ones. And this ruling has already opened the door to a whole new wave of legal challenges that could reshape firearm policy across the United States for years to come. Right now, attorneys are moving quickly. Some are preparing lawsuits aimed directly at federal regulations they believe are vulnerable under this new legal standard. Others are reviewing older cases that were previously dismissed, wondering if they now have a second chance. And federal agencies know it. That's why internal reviews are already happening behind closed doors. Officials are looking at current firearm policies and asking difficult questions. Which rules are clearly backed by congressional law? Which rules depend heavily on interpretation? Which ones could survive a court challenge? And which ones might not? Those questions matter because the ruling created something agencies fear most: legal instability. When a court signals that authority may have limits, every policy built on uncertain ground suddenly becomes vulnerable. That doesn't mean every regulation disappears. Far from it. But it does mean future lawsuits may have stronger arguments than before. And if enough courts agree with those arguments, the entire legal landscape could begin shifting piece by piece. Now, here's where things become even more serious. This ruling may not only affect future regulations, it could also affect enforcement. Because if courts begin questioning whether certain rules were properly authorized, defense attorneys could start challenging enforcement actions tied to those rules. That means past prosecutions, pending cases, and future investigations could all become part of this larger legal fight. And when that happens, the effects spread quickly through the justice system. Judges must respond, appeals increase, and uncertainty grows even larger. For law enforcement agencies, this creates a difficult situation. Officers depend on clear guidance, clear definitions, clear standards. But when courts begin changing how regulations are interpreted, enforcement becomes more complicated. Training manuals may need updates, policies may need revisions, and departments across the country may be forced to adjust procedures based on how future courts apply this ruling. That process takes time. And during that time, confusion can grow. Now, another major issue is how different states may react. Some states may attempt to strengthen their own firearm laws in response to the ruling. Others may move in the opposite direction, believing the decision supports fewer restrictions. That could create even greater differences between states. In one state, certain regulations may remain strict. In another, similar rules may face legal collapse. And for gun owners who travel across state lines, that complexity becomes even harder to navigate. Because firearm laws are already difficult to follow nationwide, this ruling could make the legal map even more complicated. At the same time, lawmakers in Washington are under growing pressure. Some politicians are calling for Congress to step in immediately and pass clearer firearm legislation. Others argue that the ruling proves agencies already had too much power and that Congress should avoid expanding regulations further. That divide is intense, and it reflects a deeper political conflict that has existed for decades. The conflict between public safety concerns and constitutional protections. The conflict between federal authority and individual rights. And now, the courts are once again at the center of that conflict. But here's what makes this moment different. The court didn't simply rule on one isolated issue. It challenged the very process used to create and enforce major regulations. That's why this ruling is being compared to other landmark decisions that changed how government power works in America. Because when the rules about rulemaking change, everything connected to that system can change too. Now, legal scholars are beginning to debate another major question. Could this ruling weaken the influence of federal agencies long-term? Some believe it absolutely could. They argue that agencies will now act more cautiously, knowing courts may closely examine whether Congress clearly authorized their actions. Others believe agencies will adapt and continue operating with only minor adjustments. But even those experts admit something important. The balance of power has shifted. Maybe slightly, maybe significantly, but shifted nonetheless. And that shift is why so many people are paying attention right now. Because once power moves inside the legal system, the consequences can last for years, sometimes decades. Now, another critical factor in this story is the role of the Supreme Court itself. This ruling sends a message about how the justices currently view agency authority. It suggests a stronger focus on constitutional structure, a stronger emphasis on the idea that Congress, not agencies, should make major policy decisions. And that philosophy could influence many future rulings beyond firearms, environmental policy, healthcare, financial regulation, immigration. Every area where agencies interpret laws could eventually feel the ripple effects. That's why analysts across the political spectrum are studying this case so closely. Because it's not just about guns, it's about governance. It's about how America's legal system distributes power, and those questions affect everyone. Now, for millions of gun owners, emotions are mixed. Some feel relieved. They believe the ruling protects constitutional rights and limits government overreach. Others feel nervous, not because they oppose the ruling itself, but because uncertainty creates risk. And uncertainty is exactly what exists right now. Because no one fully knows how far future courts will take this decision. No one knows which regulations may survive untouched, and which ones could face serious legal trouble. And no one knows how quickly new lawsuits may move through the courts. That uncertainty creates tension, especially in a country where firearm laws are already one of the most emotionally charged legal issues. Now here's another important reality. Even though this ruling is significant, the legal process ahead will not move overnight. Major constitutional battles take time, cases move slowly, appeals happen, arguments evolve, and courts often disagree before higher courts finally resolve the issue. So while this decision may be a turning point, the full transformation, if one comes, could take years to unfold. That's important to understand, because headlines often make it sound like everything changes instantly. But the real legal impact usually develops gradually, through one case after another, one ruling after another, until eventually a completely new legal framework emerges. That may be what we are witnessing right now, the beginning of a new framework for how firearm regulations are evaluated in America. And if that's true, this moment could become historically important, not just politically, legally, constitutionally, structurally. Another thing experts are watching closely is whether the Supreme Court will eventually take more firearm-related cases connected to this issue. Many believe the answer is yes, because once lower courts begin applying this ruling differently, conflicts are almost guaranteed to appear. One appeals court may uphold a regulation. Another may strike down a similar one. And when federal courts split like that, the Supreme Court often steps in to resolve the disagreement. Which means this ruling could be only the first chapter in a much larger legal story. A story that continues for years, possibly shaping American gun law for an entire generation. Right now, though, the country is in a transition period, a period where the old rules still exist, but the legal foundation beneath them is shifting. And when foundations shift, everyone pays attention. Lawyers, judges, politicians, agencies, gun owners, advocacy groups. Everyone understands that something significant has happened, even if the final outcome is still unclear. That's why this story matters so much. Not because every law changed overnight, but because the rules governing how those laws are created and defended may have changed in a very deep way. And when that happens, the effects rarely stay limited to one courtroom. They spread, slowly at first, then faster over time. until eventually, the entire system begins to adapt. That adaptation process has already started, and as it continues, more questions will emerge, more lawsuits will appear, more rulings will be issued, and step by step, the future of firearm regulation in America will begin taking shape. But today, one thing is already clear. Millions of gun owners are watching this closely for a reason, because they understand that this ruling could mark the beginning of one of the biggest legal shifts in modern firearm history. And the next chapter may be even bigger than the first.